So we've got a panel now which is discussing the road to mass adoption. So I just wanted to kick it off really firstly by asking, what do we actually mean by mass adoption? You can start, Bobby.
Well, for me, mass adoption would be for people outside of this room, for our friends and family, for our parents and children and cousins, to start buying and holding cryptocurrency. And ideally Bitcoin, but cryptocurrency is fine too.
So for me, mass adoption means that people are using Bitcoin and you no longer have to explain it, like the way we use email today. And I like to use email less and less today. I like doing everything through direct messaging, even sending files. I find that more convenient. So mass adoption to me means people are using Bitcoin freely, and you no longer have to explain to people what Bitcoin is. So you don't have to explain like, what internet is. That's mass adoption to me.
To me, it would be the majority of the world population having exposure to the asset class, the market cap of Bitcoin being large enough in the multi-trillion, maybe 10 trillion above, and it having a major impact in world macro markets.
I personally will not measure adoption as a percentage of people in the world, but as a percentage of people that can actually use Bitcoin with profit right now. People who need Bitcoin. Right now, I think a lot of people need Bitcoin, but they don't use it because it's too new, it's too strange, it's something not yet there. So if I see a high percentage of people, for example, who would like to trade online, but they can't because they don't have a bank KYC identity, using Bitcoin for that, that's mass adoption. I mean, they can do that now, but they don't know it, so it will take time. If a lot of gray and black market uses Bitcoin, that's mass adoption. Of course, black market and gray market are basically unregulated free markets, and one of the most important unregulated activity that you can perform today is saving. So black market saving and gray market saving, so being allowed to save your money and your wealth, even if you are not given an explicit political permission, is the most important use case today, in my opinion, just as Saifedean explained. So when most of the people will start to save in Bitcoin because they're forbidden to save in with other monetary means, that's basically mass adoption. It will take a while, but we have time.
Trace, hi.
Oh, thanks. Sorry.
It's okay. So before we get into the road to mass adoption, the first question I asked was, what does mass adoption really mean?
I mean, I think it's a lot of people being aware of the brand, being aware of the understanding of what they might need to use it for, and exactly what Giacomo was talking about. You know, in this world of financial repression, gold price suppression scheme, interest rate suppression scheme, just the rise of the state and the power that they've had over the purse and over money. You know, the pendulum swings back and forth throughout history. We had the Bank of England collapse, and so Isaac Newton created the gold standard, and you know, we had the continental dollar collapse and the French assignat. Like, the pendulum swings back and forth, and the pendulum has just swung so far in terms of the power that the state has over property and over money and things like this, that, you know, life always finds a way from Jurassic Park, right? And the apex predator is hatched out of its egg, and that stock-to-flow ratio is coupled with high censorship-resistant properties, or these properties that constitute sound money. And for that, you have to look at the qualitative theory of money. And so why are you hiring the asset or the good? Like, what job is it performing? And when we look at that, you know, you can look at sound money, and you need scarcity and censorship resistance, and in the information age you need extensibility, you need divisibility, portability, durability, indestructibility, you need privacy, anonymity, fungibility, which are currently, you know, weak spots on Bitcoin, but life finds a way. It always does, and that pendulum is swinging away from this state-controlled money towards the individual again. And I think the thesis in the sovereign individual about changing the economics of violence and how asymmetric cryptography does that is what is part of the large macro trend that's driving it. And so then, you know, number go up, right? Like everybody wants to chase the rabbit, and that's where the mass adoption comes, is, you know, that first network effect of speculation and everybody chasing the rabbit so that they're able to protect their retirement accounts. You know, because this is also the largest wealth transfer in the history of humanity. And so, like, are you going to be a beneficiary of the wealth transfer or not? And, you know, and so mass adoption just drives through all of those human emotions and that human action. And so that's kind of how I see it, is, you know, there's this need to be able to protect yourself against the state that is confiscating everything. They're confiscating it through inflation. They're now adding a little box on your tax return. They're tracking everything on chain. They're paying chain analysis a bunch of money to do it. Munchin is going to be enforcing the travel rule. So any exchanges that don't attach all of this personal identifying information to your transactions will be decapitated, because if Kraken sends Bitcoin to Binance on behalf of the customer, and the customer even makes the representation that it's going to a personal wallet, Kraken can still be fined, and Binance can be fined $5,000 per day per occurrence. And 70% of transactions are intra-exchange. So if you're not including all this information, you're done. And, you know, sure, we might want the exchanges to be in the fighting truth to power business ideologically, but as the CEO of Netflix said, we're not in that business. We're in the entertainment business. And so in order to maintain the liquidity pools, what do we have to do pragmatically? Because we're not going to get mass adoption if it's extremely difficult and there aren't liquidity pools for the coins. So, you know, this is a big, complicated game that we're playing, and there's a lot that the regulators can do in wielding the violence against, you know, the different institutions and organizations. But, you know, mass adoption, when people start making a bunch of money, they start getting political influence, and they start passing laws like we've done in Wyoming, you know, with property rights being defined with digital assets, and setting up constitutional fights and challenges between the feds and the states. And the states, you know, they're going to be fighting because they want the job creation happening there. And so then you get the governor being like, hey, Caitlin, where are my applications for the banks? You know, you start getting political will. And the technology can get it out there, but we have to have the political will to keep it there. And so the mass adoption becomes a critical part of that.
Well, fuck Mnuchin.
Yeah, but he's Secretary of the Treasury appointed by the President of the United States. And the government is this law.
Well, I've got a question for you then.
Is a primary protocol that the society operates on. You can rage against it all you want, and you know what it's going to get you? Ask Ross Ulbricht.
Well, so I've got a question.
He's not getting out ever. He
well,
lost his appeal. He's done.
Well, no, he will come out one day.
No,
Agreed.
not
Agreed.
only with the presidential pardon.
Well,
Okay,
with mass adoption, but
if I can add up, my definition of mass adoption is people funding with Bitcoin and as a private mercenary to get Ross out. That's mass adoption.
yeah, he'll be out. So I do have a question for you then, because you've talked therefore about the state having the ability to seize from us at will and more power. And as we head into a election in November in the US, and I visited a Trump rally yesterday and saw lots of happy Trump supporters. And what we have here is a divided country, but who are politically aligned. As we go into an election, you'll have them probably, let's just for the sake of argument say, half the country supporting Trump and then half the supporters, the country supporting whoever the DNC allow. Therefore, we have people who support the state because they're getting behind, they're cheerleading for their leader. So how do we ever get people to actually move to a position where they revolt against the state? Because if your point is that the state is increasing their power, how do we do anything when everyone's still loving them?
Well, I mean, Bloomberg loves to not pay taxes, right? Like the more people that have to check that box and write a big check to the IRS, the more painful it gets politically to keep having that type of stuff in place. So, you know, it's mass adoption with the number going up and people having to pay their taxes because they're all locked in with a travel rule. Guess what? They're going to start talking to their representatives and stuff like that. And fortunately, in the Western democracies, for the most part, we have fair and honest elections, and we have a way to change the process without 20 or 30 million dead people. That's the only way you change it in China.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, at least we have that ability and that option here. And that's what we're doing in Wyoming, and we have other states that Tyler and I have met with legislators from other states, and they're copying that legislation. So we got good hodler legislation out there first, with strong property rights at the state level. You know, it's a process to move society as a whole. But the economics can really drive a lot of that, and taxes really help unite people, you know, when they start having to pay them.
Okay. Willy, I've got a question for you. As I travel the world and do my job and I meet people, you know, whether I'm checking into a hotel or if I'm in a bar and somebody turns around and says, what do you do? I say, I have a Bitcoin podcast. I almost never get somebody say to me, oh, what is Bitcoin? So I think we have mass awareness. We have mass awareness. I regularly preach to my friends on Facebook about the problems with central banks and, you know, how inflation is terrible for their money and their savings, yet we still don't have mass adoption. So why is that?
I guess people, they don't need to, they've made the own subjective value calculation, and they've decided they don't need to hire Bitcoin to accomplish what most people are hiring it for. They feel just fine in their Apple stock or their Tesla stock, or wherever they're allocating their capital, if they even have any. A lot of people are in debt. They don't have the disposable income. They have been kept on life support with the credit system. You know, there's a lot of misallocated capital out there, and a lot of people, you know, want to keep living in the trying to avoid the final crack up boom. But, you know, it's coming whether you like it or not. So, like, gonna get yourself protected or not?
Can I get a stab at it, or should?
Well, I did ask Willy.
I'll just say, you know, human nature is one that looks at things in a linear stance. So we're not very good at looking at exponential growth, which is obviously what Bitcoin is doing. So the equivalent question is, you know, the internet was invented in the 1960s, 1994 now, and why don't we have mass adoption? But the thing is, it was growing at a very hyperbolic rate. And if you were to look at where we are on that adoption curve, we're 1% of the world population holding this asset class. And if you look at the rate of which that's growing, which is 2x every year, so there's kind of a Moore's law of adoption happening right now. It's a 4x in a bull market. If you run those numbers, we're going to have half the world using this stuff within 7 years. So when you say, why don't we have mass adoption? Well, it's happening now. And by the time we hit like 5%, 15%, it'll be just a year or two away before it's there. So I'd look at the model of the internet and what happened by the time we hit the 2000s. There'll be a lot of change.
Can I go?
Yes, you can.
Yeah,
go.
so for me, I think the two biggest challenges I've seen people in terms of mass adoption are how to buy Bitcoin and how to store Bitcoin. So how to buy traditionally has been difficult. There's been exchanges more and more now in the world, but it's the process, the KYC, the bank transfer. It turns out the hardest part to buying Bitcoin is actually moving the traditional money into an exchange, moving it in, moving it out, proving it, and so on. So that's what the exchanges have to do. I've sold my exchange, so I'm out of business. We'll leave the exchange operator to deal with how to buy Bitcoin. And of course, there's OTC, there's peer-to-peer, and stuff like that. So now what I'm focused on is how to store and hold Bitcoin. It turns out Bitcoin is just information. In the end, it's about the private keys you have. That's the Bitcoin, how you prove you own it. So it's information. On the one hand, if you're savvy with IT and computer science, it's easy to store information. But for the 99% of the world, it's actually very hard to manage secure private key information. Right? Think about it. Who in their right mind would wake up like, oh yeah, I'm excited today. I'm going to go manage my private keys today. Right? So it's a very hard process, and which is why my new venture, Ballet, we're trying to address that, trying to make private keys easy for the 99% of the people. And by the way, they're not in this room. Right? They're far away. It's the 5 billion people who are not in this room.
Like who?
Oh, yeah, grandma, parents, just everyone you see on the street, like every person you met up until you stepped into this room.
Yeah, I
and-
completely
Right.
agree about. Oh, sorry, Bob.
Oh, like here's a good use case. Say my friend and his wife, they just got pregnant, and my grandmother gave me savings bonds, and when I was 18, 20, that's when I cashed my savings bonds in. So I had them like 10, 15 years. So I had these savings bonds 10, 15 years, right? If I want to give my friend's new child some Bitcoin that they're going to use perhaps for college in 10 or 15 years, how do I do that? And
Here. Now
well,
you can.
and I want to give it in a way, especially if I were giving it to family, because I want family reunions to not be awkward. And one way to make a family reunion awkward is you gave the niece or someone some Bitcoin and then it disappeared, and you touch those private keys. So I need something where I can't
Install the bootloader, patch the firmware, pair the Bluetooth. Does that make sense?
I
So
think yes.
So it's a different product, right? I've been in Bitcoin for 11 years. I only finally thought of this last year. It took me 8 years to really come up with this product.
So what
Right.
are, for you, the difference between this card and a Bitcoin-denominated credit? So if you send out a
Bitcoin
card, denominated credit. So if you send out a card with a number, and that number represents the credit from denominated in Bitcoin from your company. That's easy, right?
That would be what they call a custodial Bitcoin certificate, right? That has a third-party reliance. You're relying on the third party to redeem it. So if I give you a Bitcoin certificate, if my last company did that, right? We have accounts BTCC. So these things are relying on third-party company. If you go back, if you hold on to that for 3 years, 5 years, I have the right to cut you off and move the money out in that case. But for Ballet, we don't. We don't have your private keys. This uses BIP38. It's a two-factor private key. There's an encrypted private key and a passphrase. We make those two using offline computers, random number generators with dice rolls, physical entropy. They're done in 2 different countries by 2 different teams of people. The 2 data sets never come together. So think of it as an egg and the sperm. They never fertilize.
And if you get subpoenaed by the NSA about changing the
I'll
process,
tell you what happens. I purposely choose 2 countries who are diametrically opposed to each other. There's no extradition treaties. So if we get subpoenaed in the U.S., the best I could do is give them the recent batch of passphrases I generated. And guess what? If I did that, I would throw away all the wallet cards, but I'll hand over the the passphrases.
Which countries?
That's the U.S. and China.
Okay.
And if China government sequesters our office, sequesters our employees, at best we give them the sticker rolls that has encrypted private key. And guess what? When we give it to them, we were not going to make wallets out of them. So as soon as we make the wallets, we destroy the data. Like for every person who's paranoid that Bobby Lee has your private key, I'm a thousand times more paranoid than you guys. Does that make sense? I'm financially independent. I have a brand. Why? I can't sleep at night if I did not delete the private keys.
Yeah.
Ask Mike Caldwell. Same thing. He can sleep at night because he deleted all the private keys.
But we have to
well,
trust
I
you.
think that Mark
You
Carpellis
trust me
sleeps
not
at
more than
night.
any
Right
other
now
wallet.
it's rich and free.
Think about, hold on a second. You say you have to trust me.
We have to
You
trust you.
do, yes.
Trusted third parties
show,
and security
Show me
holders.
another wallet. Tell me another wallet that you don't have to trust.
It's not. It doesn't matter if there's others. It's still the same point.
Every wallet, you have to trust someone.
Well, everything in life.
Every
The
wallet.
point is the fragmentation of redundancy on trust. If you can spread out trust in different sources, you are better off about anti-fragility, about state intervention.
Sure.
In this case, I mean, I have to really believe that your U.S. company cannot order the Chinese company to do something different. And I mean, I really hope that's true, because in that case would be perfect plausible deniability for you against the
Exactly.
regulator.
That's why we did this. By the way, BIP38. Who here knows about BIP38? Mike Caldwell. This is from like 6, 8, 10 years ago. Okay? So we say the passphrase encrypts the private key. The private key is encrypted by the passphrase. People get confused. People think I manually encrypt the private key with that passphrase. No. If I did that, the two data came together. Does that make sense? They came together. The data never touched each other. They were thousands of miles apart. We actually created we created the passphrase first, and then we use BIP38 standard. We create what they call an intermediate code, which is derived from the passphrase, but which cannot be used to guess the passphrase. It's like a hash. And then we take the intermediate code, then we derive the encrypted private key from that. It has the DNA of the passphrase.
But you also have a product.
Gold, well, you're right, they can by force. But at least if I get hit by a bus, the gold will go to my family, to my children, because the gold is still locked up, unless it's stolen by theft. So this is another reason why we make this, because we're turning something digital, ephemeral, on the blockchain into something physical. So this has to be empty. But if I load this up with whatever amount, people ask me how much I can put on here. And I'll tell them unlimited. But obviously, I don't recommend that. Don't put $10 million worth of Bitcoin on here. But if you put 1,000, even 10,000, no problem.
So yeah, I know I'm talking too much. I know, not as much as Trace, but I'm talking too much. But just the last thing, and then I really shut up. My problem is exactly that. Since Bitcoin is a bearer instrument with very good plausible deniability, you cannot be sure that the same security measures that in centralized company guarantee your security in pre-Bitcoin stuff will work now. My example is the probability that that an employee of Gemalto will mess around with an HSM for a bank system are low because they cannot easily get away with a bank transfer if we tamper with that. The probability that one of the employees in your two companies will try to alter the process that was conceived in a pre-Bitcoin world, I think is higher, not very high, but higher. And what I would like to have is actually just very honest marketing about, I mean, this may be secure in this case or not, and this is the risk, and these are the failure scenario. If you are honest with that, I think that can be a very good solution, but we really need clarity about risks.
Okay, just conscious of time.
Let me just...
We will carry this debate on. You and Rodolfo can argue it on my show. Willy, I've got another question.
Wait. Just want to segue this private key discussion, which, we're talking about mass adoption. And the reality is that we're moving away from private key individual sovereignty. Like, since 2017, the amount of coins that are held by individuals is diminishing as a percentage of the network, right? Right now, 25% of all Bitcoins out there are held at exchanges and custody providers and so forth. So this whole private key side of things, people owning their own coins, the elephant in the room is that is losing, and it's losing at a very fast rate. So what we're looking at right now is a whole bunch of institutions holding digital gold in vaults, and then having legal contracts about people owning that. And so, we get back to something like the gold standard, where there's a bunch of gold.
I think yes, because we are focusing on two biases. I think we think that this is due to the very bad marketing that Bitcoin had in the first years.
I know firsthand that there are countries, there are billions of people who are still, in the poverty or in the very low income state. And thankfully, due to the internet and mobile phones, today these people are getting internet connection, but they're still paying by the kilobyte in terms of the data charges, right? They're not getting a free flow of data. They're still paying by the kilobyte, by the gigabyte, okay, by the megabyte, and so on. So my point is, true mass adoption, in my mind, is when 90% of the world have access and have digital currencies. And some of it will be in custody, but hopefully most of it will be holding it themselves on their mobile phones, on their computers, on their new wearable computers, Apple Watch or whatever watches, and so on. And hopefully in physical form as well, in these bearer instrument physical paper wallets or ballet wallets. So that's my hope. And because I think if people, think about what is money. To me, money, besides all the classic characteristics, money is actually proof of my work, my labor. We all had summer jobs when we were teenagers. When you mow the lawn, when you babysit for your neighbor, that money you held on to. If you didn't spend it, it's worth a lot less today, 20, 30 years later. Why is it worth a lot less? Because the government, through the monopoly on money, can steal from you, can tax you without you authorizing it. I remember when I first came to the United States in 1989, a $100 bill with that very small Benjamin Franklin. Remember those $100 bills? They were worth a lot of money. Today, a $100 bill, the Benjamin Franklin is bigger, but it's actually worth less. What's with that?
Still worth $100.
Yeah, but what can it buy? Right? My point is, if the rest of the world can buy into an appreciating asset like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, it would do a lot better for them. Right?
Another question is, I've obviously triggered a few people over the last year or so by refusing to learn how the protocol works, not really running a node properly. I've never done multi-sig. I don't know what an XPub is, and I tend to just avoid all that because it's just too fucking much.
You have the right to do that.
Yeah, and well, I don't because and I get a lot of people who actually appreciate that, who agree with me. Do you think we have expectations that are too high of users? I know what you're going to say. You're going to call them slaves, Trace, because you did that on my show. But do we have expectations that are too high? And is being self-sovereign with Bitcoin too hard?
This is the blind spot, right? This is.
Are you saying I'm right?
This is the real version of the real population. And we sit here in this room thinking, whoa, you know, I need to understand how a SHA-256 hash works. I need to understand proof of work. People, everyone here, majority of you guys tried to convert your friends into Bitcoin by explaining how Bitcoin works at the network level, as if you had to explain how a cell phone network works and the ARM chip sitting inside that phone has to be understood before you're going to buy into owning a cell phone. That's not how it works. So I think this is the blind spot within the Bitcoin community. We focus on the self-sovereign and the technology underneath it, but most people don't give a shit, you know? They just want to buy into this, you know, naturally occurring Ponzi. They want number go up, right? And that drives, you know, the mass adoption. And
it's same for gold, by the way. So I love gold. Gold is valuable because of its chemical properties. But for most of us out here who hold gold, we don't have to have PhDs in chemistry. We don't have to know about the chemical properties, the bonding, the resistance level, all the different chemical aspects of gold, right? We just know gold is good. But the chemistry professors can tell you why gold is really great as a chemical element for natural element for money. So same thing. We're the experts here for Bitcoin. We know about all the things that you refuse to go into, which is fine. Which is absolutely fine. And here, right?
Thank you.
Load it up.
So I think that there is a diplomatic answer here. Like we have, the diplomatic answer is we have to have both. Like the users, they will eventually need to get more sophisticated because they will suffer. They will see funds steal, company close. So send it. So let me make you an example. I want to receive money on my blog. I just use PayPal. But then they shut my PayPal down because I am inappropriate, I'm not politically correct, and now I need Bitcoin. Well, just use Coinbase. But then Coinbase shut me down because of whatever, because they're still a centralized bank. And then, okay, I will use Bitcoin address. But then that's very bad for privacy, and fees are too high, so nobody pays me anymore. So let's use Lightning Network. Let's use a centralized solution like Bodle Pay, which is very cool. But then European Union changes the KYC regulation, and Bodle Pay has to close down. And so now I have to actually start the server with BTC Pay server. So eventually the user, the dumb user, will have to learn by suffering to become more sophisticated. On the other hand, the diplomatic answer will be the developers will have to learn to be more user-friendly, more graphic interface. But okay, but that's not entirely true. There is an asymmetry there. The user really do need to get more sophisticated to survive. The developer, I mean, they are open source voluntary developers. They don't give a fuck, and they shouldn't give a fuck. You're not paying them. They are open source developers. So their incentives to get across you, they are very, very low because they can use Bitcoin. They can make money where you cannot. So, I mean, you can ask politely, please make me a user interface. But I mean, the way most people present this problem is the way of a spoiled brat. Like, where is my graphic interface? I mean, they don't care. They can use Bitcoin. They are sovereign. They are the next aristocracy of the world if this experiment works. So ask nicely and pay them.
Are you saying I was right?
No, I'm not nothing personal here, but there is some like McCormackism going around, like, where is my easy path to Bitcoin?
I'm on your side. I'm on your side.
Thank you. I think we're going to open up the floor now for questions. If anyone's got any questions for this amazing panel, please take advantage.
All right, come on, guys. Someone's got to have a question for this amazing panel. Coming up? All right.
So basically an expansion on something we mentioned yesterday. But Bitcoin turning into just another financial instrument in the eyes of the financial industry, is that hurting or helping the adoption of for the little man?
Well, I'll say it quickly. So remember stocks, like company shares? There used to be bearer stock certificates. You guys remember that? These days, it's all centralized by the DCC. I think DTCC or something like that. So my point is, with Bitcoin, even if the financial institutions try to suck it up and make them into these instruments and securities where they pass it between financial institutions, it's okay because there's still the base layer Bitcoin that we can transact person to person without their permission. So I'm not too worried about it, but it will help adoption.
So this question is, will the sort of financialization of Bitcoin, you know, Bitcoin meets Wall Street, does that help the little man? I think that, well, the adoption of Bitcoin is going to jump massively when we can, like, you know, ring up the stockbroker and buy, or even my retirement funds is already allocated into Bitcoins automatically by some fund manager. So yeah, that means that instantly you get a big step up in adoption. But you know, Bitcoin might not be Bitcoin when that happens, right? There's the spirit of Bitcoin, of self-sovereignty, and so I can sort of see this thing going, and we have worldwide adoption and mass adoption, and actually it's not Bitcoin anymore. I think that's danger.
Here's an example of how mass adoption is here already, and that is scams. So I operate Bitcoin, next-gen ATMs, which does many things, Vault Logic, but people are told, go to this payment kiosk, no mention of Bitcoin. Put this code into the machines, QR code, no mention of Bitcoin. Pay your fine to the IRS, buy concert tickets, and people do it. They don't know it's Bitcoin. Put cash in the machine, and you will free your brother-in-law from jail because someone was persuaded that the brother-in-law was in jail. That's happening already. I know it is because that's the industry I'm in. So in some ways, hooray, no one knows we're using Bitcoin. The stupidest people, in fact, are falling for these scams. So how do we prevent that? How do we fix that? I mean, I just wanted to share that. It's interesting. You know, evidence of mass adoption, scams are working.
Well, first of all, kudos for saying that your industry is scams. I mean, that's true for everybody, but nobody is so honest. So great. No, I agree. Like, one of the most bullish things that I ever seen was actually the tutorial of the crypto locker. The ransomware evolved their tutorial. Their tutorial was the perfect normie tutorial for Bitcoin because these people know how to, I mean, ransom is a bad but perfect use case for Bitcoin, and these people really learn how to do mass adoption instructions. So it was very, very good. And yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah, that's true.
So yeah, I have more than a question. It's like a thought about what Bob Willy said earlier. I don't really agree with what you said about wallets because you said that with every wallet you're actually trusting somebody, and it's kind of true. But the point is, with like an open source wallet, you're either trusting yourself if you can actually read the code, or maybe somebody else you already trust, like for other reasons, social reasons, to read the code for you. And that is not true for like your product because here there's no like there's nobody that can look into your or maybe you could open it up, but you have no like guarantee that the thing you show to the outside is actually what's going on behind. So
yeah,
I don't know. I don't think it's.
We open source the software, the decryption software. It's a BIP38 standard open source. We will sort of open source a process by allowing people to come to our facilities to audit how we make them. But the reality is, our product is not designed for people who can read software. If you can audit open source software, our product is not for you. And I challenge you, by the way. For example, a case with Bread Wallet. I hope, are any Bread Wallet people here? Bread Wallet is open source. You can audit it. But my colleague at BTC China a few years ago, he downloaded Bread Wallet, put in Bitcoins, and guess what? 2 minutes later, his Bitcoins were gone.
I do understand that.
And the problem is, you audit the software, that's fine. Or you have someone, trusted people audit the software. They say, Bread Wallet's good to go. But the problem is, the version you have installed on your phone, it's very hard for you to prove that that's a version that was so-called audited.
I don't think it is. Like, for most
Well,
apps,
then how did my
button.
friend get hacked? Because he downloaded a faulty version.
I could ask somebody who I trust to review the code for me.
Do you
Take-
compile your own mobile apps?
Yeah, I do because I'm a developer. But the point
Do you compile your own operating system?
yeah.
Do you,
sometimes.
so Android phone, do you design the own chips?
No.
Do you have your own chip fab?
No, I mean, my
Do you
point
make
is-
your own RAM?
So you're saying that.
My
like,
point is you
you're
can't check
comparing-
everything.
I understand, but the point is, I'm fairly, I don't know, confident that nobody backdoored my ARM chip on my phone to steal bitcoins, because it's like commodity hardware. It's like generalized.
Wait, so you think your ARM chip has no bugs in it?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that.
My point is,
I'm
it's
either.
sure you eventually you can check everything, but
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I would either use. I would prefer to use like a generic laptop, air-gapped laptop.
I
compared
agree
to
with
another
you.
Wallet because
I
it's
agree with
generic
you.
hardware.
You should do that. You should do that.
And people who trust me, like people in my social.
You should do that. But your parents and grandparents, do you want them to use that process to hold their Bitcoin?
No,
or do
but
you
if
think
they
it's
trust
better
me-
for them to use this?
If they trust me, I can actually I can compile the app for them and install it on their phone.
Exactly.
And that's-
I've been in Bitcoin for 9 years. 9 years ago, 7, 8, 9 years ago, I did the same thing. I set up these computers, the hardware wallets for my friends and family. After a while, it's too darn complicated. It's not worth my time anymore. So my question is, everything you're doing for yourself, I applaud you. That's great. I do the same, just like you do. Okay?
I personally wouldn't trust myself. I wouldn't make that product because the only thing I would do is for people who trust me, I will install the app on their phone. And if some other people doesn't trust me, that's fine. I wouldn't go
So
out
now
and-
you're asking them to trust you.
No,
Same
no,
thing.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that people can voluntarily trust me and come to me.
That's
and ask
that's
me.
what I'm doing. People voluntarily trust me to use this product.
Yeah,
If
but-
you don't trust me, don't use it.
They all have to trust you, and you're.
They
not
don't have to
super-
trust me.
Yeah, they
Remember,
have to trust you. They have to
the
trust
world, people have choice. People who trust me use this product. People who trust you use your solution. That's fine.
Yeah, people have to trust you to use the product, and there's no other way. While
That,
if I make
that-
all,
my
people
point
can
is
trust
that is true of everything. When you go buy Coca-Cola at 7-Eleven store, you trust the brand Coca-Cola. You open it up, there's no rat poison in there.
Oh, sorry.
Am I right?
Okay,
You trust
so-
7-Eleven, there's no rat poison in there. My point is, with physical world, there's always trust involved.
I
If
don't
you
know
think
if
that's not the
one
case, I debate you.
I don't know
Like I
one
said,
software
just
developer
disagree.
that compiles their own code, that compiles their own operating system, but also have audited the hardware chips on that device or manufactured them themselves. I kind of think this is another weakness of this ethos of don't trust, verify, is that in practical circumstances, for the majority of people, particularly at mass adoption, it's not viable.
Yeah, and part of this is when you have $100 of Bitcoin, you can put $100 of thought into securing it. When you have $10 billion on because you're running an exchange, you need to put a little bit more thought into it. And there's always going to be this trade-off between security and convenience and cost and time. And love my family, but them free riding off of all of my time. It's just, I got other things to do, like let's play Monopoly or something.
So I agree about trade-offs and compromises, necessity between easiness and security, but I think it's a little bit dishonest to use the argument, to use the plain argument that everything is trusted anyway, because I mean that's literally, it's literally true, but it's contextually dishonest because let's imagine, okay, I give you a hard disk. A hard disk will break after 2 days. You come back to me, this hard disk doesn't last. Okay, but I mean, the sun will eventually destroy the hard anyway, so nothing will last forever. That's literally true, but we are talking context. I mean, in the context of an hard drive, in order not to be a scam, it must be seriously, it must probably survive for a few years, while in the context of Bitcoin, not having to trust, that doesn't mean not having to trust. I mean, maybe we live in a simulation, and so your private key are matrix private key anyway. Okay, that's true, but there is a context in which having a complete closed enterprise process is absolutely different level of security than having an open source reviewed code, which is okay. You may choose the other, as you said, but you cannot represent everything as equal. It's seriously unequal to have open source software that can be checked by everybody eventually, or having something which is closed with NDAs and stuff.
I'm not saying it's equal.
Yeah, and another, just looking at it pragmatically, when we, at Armory, we had inbound customer requests, and we were just open source anyway, so, you know, we're just doing customer support, but not really getting paid for it. But the people mostly, I mean, they never got hacked. That's not how they lost their Bitcoin. They lost their Bitcoin because they lost their backup or something. And our inbound customer requests, I mean, the people who came towards us with that were storing in excess of 5 million Bitcoin total. In almost every case, you know, where any Bitcoins are lost, it's from user error because they lost their backup or something. They very rarely, if ever, got hacked. It was very, very interesting just to see that. And so if you're using a Purism laptop and you got a good hardware stack on there that's clean and open source and it doesn't have a Wi-Fi card in it, I mean, you've raised that barrier on somebody to compromise your private keys really, really high.
Can I just comment? So I really like your point. It's about ease of use. No matter how secure your thing is, if you reduce the ease of use, people screw up, and then the coins are lost. I think more coins are lost through the loss of passwords and passphrases and screwing up the recovery stuff than coins are stolen. I think millions of Bitcoins are dead because of that, right? So that's something to pay attention to. It's not about open source. Open source doesn't solve that problem. Trustless doesn't solve that problem, right? I'm not saying trustless and open source are bad things. I'm just saying that don't forget the other side of the argument. Thank you, Trace, for mentioning that.
I'm going to let you into a secret. I've never once reviewed any open source code for anything ever. I wouldn't know how to. I don't even know anyone who can. And I think there's more people probably like me than like that. It's a little secret. Are we done? All right. Thank you. Thank you to everyone.
We've achieved mass adoption.